Alright everybody, let's take a look here at lesson 10 in Futato. This is going over the count imperfect. And so section A here, we're going to focus on parsing. So what I'm going to do, you've got the parsing in the back of your book. I'm just going to point out sort of the diagnostics, the things that I look for to determine the pattern, conjugation, person, gender, number, and group. Alright, so number one here we have yiktol. When I look at yiktol, if you don't see the root tol in there sort of automatically, it's just going to take some practice. But this is a completely, completely regular verb. You'll note that on the front we have a yod. On the back we have no suffix. So that's going to tell us that we have, the yod tells us we're in the third person masculine. The lack of suffix tells us that we're singular, and the cow imperfect. The standard prefix for the cow imperfect is going to be yod in the third person, yod or tav in the actually, tav could be 3fs. So yod in the third person or tav in the third feminine singular, tav in the second person, aleph in the first common singular, and noon in the first common plural. Those are our prefix letters. Generally speaking, in the strong verbs of the cow, we're going to have a hirik as our theme, or as our prefix vowel, and that's what we have. We also have a holum as our theme vowel, so that's a less reliable clue. It's not always going to be a holum. Frequently, we'll have a patak in the theme vowel, but the holum is what we would expect. So that confirms a cow imperfect 3ms form of tall. Number two, and again, maybe we've got a lot of letters here, so maybe you don't recognize right off the bat. I think that number three will actually be a little bit trickier one. You kind of look at this and you might think, well, we'll come to number three. Let's just do number two. In the process of parsing a verb, we know it's a verb, so we can start with this process. We just ask ourselves, how many letters is the Hebrew verbal root supposed to have? 3. How many letters do I have here? I have yod, kaf, tav, beit, vav. I know this is a shurik, but it's still a vav. Alright, so that's 5. I need 3. So what's been added? Well, I like to start at the suffix or the prefix, but start at one of those two ends, because rarely are you ever going to have anything added to the root before or after the middle letter. It's usually going to be before the first letter or after the last letter. So let's start with the suffix. Is shurik ever added as a suffix? Well, it's frequently added. It's added in the perfect conjugation to a 3CP form. It's also added in the imperfect conjugation to a 3MP and a 2MP. Both of those forms have a shurik. So we can take that off. We've got 4 letters now. Okay, well, we could ask, is beit ever added as a suffix? Of course, it's not. Beit never gets added as a suffix to a verb, so we can rely on the fact that beit is part of the root, and therefore it's probably the final root letter. Like I said, rarely are you going to have something inserted in the middle of a root, especially a tav, so we can safely assume that tav is part of the root. We can ask ourselves, is yod ever added as a prefix? Well, in the imperfect, yod gets added as a prefix to the 3ms form and the 3MP form. So here, we have to decide between the 3ms and the 3MP. The shurik goes with the 3MP. If this were 3ms, we would not have the shurik here. So we have a cow imperfect 3MP form of, once we take the yod off and the shurik off, we get the tav. Alright, so number 3, same thing. When you first look at number 3, you might think that you've got a shaf or something like that as your verb. But tet here, tet is never added as a suffix. So it'd be hard to explain where this tet is coming from if our root is aleph, shin, hey. On the other hand, if tet is part of the root, and we usually have 3 letters in the root, Well, what if our root is shin, pei, tet, and aleph is what's added as a prefix? Sure enough, aleph is added to count imperfect verbs as a prefix in the 1CS form. So, let's say that that's what we've got. If we take this off, this aleph off, as our prefix letter, we're left with shin, pei, tet. Is that a verbal root that we've learned? It is. Shafat means he judged. And you count imperfect, it would be he will judge, and in the 1CS, it's going to be I will judge. We've got a count imperfect 1CS form of shafat, shin, pei, tet. Number 4, same kind of a thing. You may come here and think that the verbal root begins with a tav, because that's the first letter you see. Tav, shin, lamed, chet. How many letters are we supposed to have in a verbal root? 3. How many do we have here? We have 4. So what's extra? Is chet ever added to a verb as part of a suffix? Well, we certainly haven't seen that in the perfect. We add a comma te for the 3FS. We add a tav for the second person singular. Tav here yod for the first common singular. We add a shurek for the third common plural. We add tem or ten for the second person plural. And we add nu for the first person plural, but there's no chet in any of those. In the imperfect, we never add a chet suffix. We add a hirik yod, we may add a shurek, we may add a na, noon, comma, te ending, but we never add a chet. So chet must be part of our root. If chet is part of our root, then lamed is most likely part of our root, because we rarely are going to insert a letter within the root. It's usually at the beginning of the end. So since we're not inserting anything at the end, maybe we've inserted something at the beginning. Maybe tav is a prefix, and our root is shen, lamed, chet. Have we seen in our vocabulary a verbal root, shen, lamed, chet? Well, that's shalach. Shalach means he sent, in the count perfect 3MS. We add a tav to the front, especially a tav hirik. That's a very good candidate for the count imperfect. It's a prefix, count imperfect. Tav gets added in the 3FS, the 2MS, and the 2FS. Now, between those three, the 2FS also adds a hirik yod to the lack here. So this has to be either a count imperfect 3FS or a count imperfect 3MS. And context is the only way to tell the difference, because those two forms are actually identical. But we have a count imperfect either 3FS or 2MS from the verbal root shen, lamed, chet. And so this would be translated as either she will send or you, masculine singular, will send. Number 5, tishmeru. Tishmeru, we have 5 letters here. So what's extra? Well, early on, it's easy to tell that if we have 5 letters, we've probably got something added at the beginning and something added at the end. So shurek is at the end. Shurek is a great candidate for an added suffix to a verbal root, because it happens all the time. It happens in count perfect 3CP, it happens in count imperfect 3MP and 2NP, so it's a very common suffix. If we take that off, we're left with tav, shen, mem, and resh. And of those, tav is a good candidate for an added letter, because tav gets added to the prefix of a count imperfect in the second person or the third feminine singular. So, I guess it would also be in the third feminine plural as well, tav is added. So where do we get a tav prefix and a shurek suffix? Well, shurek is going to indicate plural, so we can throw out the singulars. Tav, we talked about in the plural, occurs in the 3FS and the 2MS and the 2FS. So 3fs, 2ms, 2fs. So to determine between those three, 3fs, 2ms, 2fs, we have to look at the suffix. 3fp is what I should say. 3fp and 2fp are going to have a na suffix. 3fp and 2fp, those feminine plural endings, are going to have a na suffix. That means our only option here is the 2mp. This is going to be Cal Imperfect 2mp of shamar. Of course, shamar means he kept, or he watched, or he observed, or he guarded. And so tish maru is going to be you all, masculine plural, will guard, keep, observe, that sort of thing, watch. All right. So then moving on to our next one here, number 6, we've got tishma'id. Tishma'id. And you might be able to start to see a pattern here, but eventually you're going to recognize in these 5-letter ones, you got something at the beginning and something at the end, okay? The end will tell you whether you're singular or plural. So an E suffix, that is a singular suffix. That goes with the 2fs. I don't even need to look at what we've got over here in the prefix, because a hieroc yod suffix as part of a conjugation so far is only going to work in one place, and that is the suffix of the Cal Imperfect 2fs. We get a noon hieroc yod in the, we get a tav hieroc yod in the Cal Perfect 1c. Tav hieroc yod. This isn't tav. This is just hieroc yod. Shin, mem, ayin are part of the root shema. And so the tav prefix confirms that I have a Cal Imperfect 2fs, because that form would also require a tav prefix. But just from the hieroc yod, the only time a conjugation is going to suffix its root with hieroc yod alone, not noon hieroc yod, not tav hieroc yod. The only time it's going to suffix with just hieroc yod is in the Cal Imperfect 2fs. So that's what I have. Cal Imperfect 2fs. The tav prefix confirms that. And then my root over here is going to be shin, nem, ayin, which is he heard. And so in the Cal Imperfect 2fs, that's going to be you, feminine singular, will hear. All right, number 7, again, we see this. Here we've got 4 letters, so you might wonder, okay, is the root noon, bait, tet? But again, we come to this chet at the end. Chet does not serve as a suffix in the conjugations. It's not in a perfect suffix. It's not in an imperfect suffix. So chet must be part of the root. If chet is part of the root, it's the final letter here. If this is the 3rd root letter, then tet is certainly the 2nd root letter. Okay? If tet is the 2nd root letter, then bait is a good candidate for our 1st root letter, which would suggest that the noon is in the prefix slot. Right, so when do we get noon as a prefix? And before I even check on that, let's just ask ourselves. So far we've established that our root is probably bait, tet, chet. Does bait, tet, chet as a verbal root sound familiar from your vocabulary? Well, that's batach. Batach, I always get it confused. I think batach is he trusted. I get it mixed up with another one. I don't want to say the other one because I don't want you to get confused. But batach, I'm pretty sure this is he trusted. So that is a root that we have learned. So far it works. Now, just because this is a root that we've learned, just because this works doesn't mean we don't have other things that work as well. And we've got to be a little bit exhaustive here. At least we will need to be more exhaustive when we get into other conjugations and other forms that are going to have multiple parsings possible. We've seen this a little bit with up here, tishlach. This doesn't have multiple roots possible, but it does have multiple parsings possible, because this could be either 3fs or 2ms. So you always have to keep an open mind to what your possibilities are, rather than just automatically going with the first one. So batach does work as a verbal root, if we go with Futato as our verbal root, when would we get a noon heuric prefix? Well, we'll learn later on down the road that noon heuric often serves as a prefix for a different pattern. So far, we're only learning the cow pattern. We'll learn later on that a noon heuric prefix may indicate a nifal pattern, but we haven't learned that yet, so we don't need to worry about it. They're not going to give us a pattern we haven't learned. So far, the only time we've seen a noon heuric prefix is in the cal imperfect 1CP. So that's what we've got here, a cal imperfect 1CP form of the tach. The tach is he trusted, so niv tach, that's going to be we will trust. And then number 8 here, we've got a lot of letters. So remember, how many letters is a Hebrew root supposed to have? 3. How many do I have here? I have 6. So I've got a lot of slicing to do to kind of trim off the extras to get back to the root. So again, I tend to start with the suffix because it's more common to have a suffix than a prefix as far as the conjugation goes. So on the suffix, comets hey, is that ever added as a suffix? Well, you know that we get a comets hey suffix in the cal perfect 3fs form. If that's what this is, then noon would be our R3 letter. If noon is our R3 letter, then lamed is almost certainly our R2 letter. And if lamed is our R2 letter, then tet is probably our R1 letter. That leaves you with a prefix of tav hov. Now I've seen tav as a prefix, tav heuric. I've never seen tav kof as a prefix. So are there any other options? Well, we started with option 1 was we have a comets hey suffix. That would be cal perfect. That doesn't work because if we have a comets hey suffix and we're in the cal perfect, that would mean that we aren't going to have a prefix because the perfect conjugation doesn't have prefixes. So already this doesn't add up. Okay, so what if our suffix isn't comets hey? What if our suffix is noon comets hey? When does that occur? Well, we've seen 2 places where the noon comets hey suffix appears. It always appears in the cal imperfect, and it's going to appear in the feminine plural form, so the 3FP and the 2FP of the cal imperfect conjugation. The difference between those two is nothing morphologically. There is no spelling difference between the cal imperfect 3FP and the cal imperfect 2FP. So we can't really decide between them here. We would need some context, and we don't have that. So our answer to the parsing should be cal imperfect 3FP or 2FP. And that means that our root, since we're going for imperfect, we've got a prefix over here with the tav heuric, we've got a suffix with the noon comets hey. So our root is kof tet lamed, katal. Who killed in the cal perfect 3ms? We'll put this in the cal imperfect 3fs. We're going to get they, feminine plural, will kill. Or in the cal imperfect 2FP, we've got you, feminine plural, will kill. Alright, so that's section 1, or section A rather. We pull up some, we've got A, B, and C, and F. Alright, so let's look at B here. Focus on the use of the imperfect. Translate the following imperfect forms as future imperfects. Alright, so pretty straightforward. Primarily what you need to do here is you need to be able to recognize the root and then be able to recognize the person, gender, and number. You already know that these are going to be cal imperfect. They've told you that it's imperfect. And he wants you to translate these as future imperfects. He specifies future imperfect because sometimes Someone may use an imperfect conjugation for present tense, or even for like potentiality. So I may do this or that. So the imperfect tense form can be used for a lot of different things. It can even be used as a command, like you will honor your father and mother. That's understood as an imperative, even though the form is not imperative. There's a separate form for the imperative. It's understood as a command. So the imperfect gets used a lot of different ways. He specifically wants us to focus on the future. We'll learn about those other uses of the imperfect later on. All right, so number one, I kind of recognize, because I know it's imperfect, I'm already looking for a prefix. Yod is a good candidate, which would read Zachar. Zachar is he remembered. So Yizkor, 3ms, would be he will remember. Emloch, I'm looking for a prefix. I see Aleph, that's 1 CS. Malach, he reigned. Amloch will be I will reign. Emloch. Number 3, Tishmeru. Right, again, I'm looking for a prefix. I see a tav. I do have a suffix over here, shurek, so this is masculine plural, and the tav tells me it's second person, 2MP. So shamar is he guarded. Tishmeru would be you, masculine plural, will guard. Nishpot, I'm looking for a prefix. I see noon, that's a Cal imperfect prefix. I'm left with Shafat. Shafat is he judged in the Cal perfect 3ms. So in the Cal imperfect 1CP, this will be we will judge. Number 5, Tiv Kach. All right, so I see my imperfect Tav. I'm left with Batach. Batach is he trusted. Tiv Tach is either Cal imperfect 3FS or Cal imperfect 2MS. This is either she will trust or you, masculine singular, will trust. Number 6, I've got Tid Rashi. Tid Rashi. Alright, I'm expecting a Tav prefix here. I've got Davrash, and then I've got a Hirakyod suffix. So the only time in the imperfect I have a Hirakyod suffix is going to be the Cal imperfect 2FS. Right? And of course the Tav prefix goes with that. So we have Cal imperfect 2FS form of the Davrash. Davrash is he inquired or he sought. So in the Cal imperfect 2FS, it's going to be you, feminine singular, will seek or will inquire. Number 7, we have Yish Kuvu. Yod prefix, shurek suffix. Those two indicate a 3MP in the Cal imperfect. They surround the root shakav. Shakav means he lay down in the Cal perfect 3ms. Here in the Cal imperfect 3MP, instead of he lay down, it is he will, they, masculine plural, will lie down. Alright, number 8, we've got Tishmana. Alright, so again, we know we're in the imperfect, so we're looking for our prefix. We've got a tav, and we've got Shema, 3 root letters, and then we've got a na suffix. So na is automatically going to tell us we've got a Cal imperfect 3FP or 2FP. This is a feminine plural suffix in the Cal imperfect. Again, the forms are the same, so we can't really tell whether this should be Shema, is he heard. Cal imperfect feminine plural, this is either they, feminine plural, will hear, or you, feminine plural, will hear. Number 9, we've got Yikrot. Looking for my prefix, I get a yod, that's a good prefix letter. I'm left with Kavrat, Kaf Resh Tav. Kavrat in the Cal perfect 3ms is he cut. And so yik wrote in the cow imperfect 3ms is going to be he will cut. And the 9 is the same, but instead of yik wrote, we get yik. Oh, I'm sorry, it's different root. So yik wrote was number 9. Number 10 we get yik tuvu. Yik tuvu. So I see my yod prefix. I also see a shuric suffix hanging out over there. Yod prefix plus shuric suffix tells me automatically I've got a 3MP in the cow imperfect. My root is kaf, tav, bait, katav. That's he wrote in the cow perfect 3ms. Yik tov then, or I'm sorry, yik tuvu then would be they, masculine plural, will write. Number 11, yizbach. Yizbach. I see my yod prefix. I'm left with zavach. Zavach in the cow perfect 3ms is he sacrificed or he slaughtered. Yizvach would be he will sacrifice or he will slaughter. You'll note here that zavach gets a patach theme vowel rather than a holem theme vowel, which is the paradigm that we learned. The reason for this is that guttural letters have a very strong preference for A-class vowels, particularly the patach. They also have something of a preference for segals, especially the het, also like segals, but here it prefers the patach rather than the holem. So that's where we get yizbach instead of yizboth. Alright. Number 12, we've got our noon prefix, so this is 1CP, on malach. Malach in the cow perfect 3ms is he reigned. Nimloch in the 1CP cow imperfect would be we will reign. Number 13, we've got ev kaf. So I look for a prefix. I see aleph, that's a 1CS prefix. Left with batach. Batach is he trusted in the cow perfect 3ms. In the cow imperfect 1CS, it becomes I will trust. Once again, we see a patach theme vowel before a het, just like we saw up here. And no holem when we've got a het here, or especially an ayin as well. We'll see that down here. The ayin also prefers the patach theme vowel. Number 14, I see a yod prefix. That tells me third person. Shuric tells me masculine plural. So I've got already, I know I have a cow imperfect 3MP. My root is shem, mem, resh, shamar. Shamar in the cow perfect 3ms is he guarded. So yish meru in the cow imperfect 3MP would be they, masculine plural, will guard. And then number 15, we've got tishma. Tishma is, we've got a prefix letter of tav. That tells me I've either got 3FS or 2MS because I have no suffix. Tav plus no suffix tells me I'm in the singular. I know it's not 2FS because in the 2FS I would have a heroic yod. So tishma is either cow imperfect 3FS or cow imperfect 2MS. Alright, so cow imperfect 2MS, that would give me he will listen or he will hear. Cow imperfect 3FS would be she will hear. Alright, moving on to C. We'll go ahead and translate through these here. When we are starting our translations in Hebrew, it's a good idea to expect a main verb in the first position, the first slot. That tends to happen a lot in Hebrew sentences. It's not always going to happen, so it's not 100% reliable, but if you expect a verb here, it's going to help you with your parsing. You're going to know that you should be looking for verbal things, so suffixes, prefixes, that sort of thing. So if I have a verb here, how many letters is a verb supposed to have? 3. How many do I have? I have 4. So, what are my suffixes? What are my prefixes? Does tav ever function as a suffix? No. Or I'm sorry, tet. I never get tet as a suffix. So, what about prefixes? Does yod ever function as a prefix? Yes. Count imperfect third person masculine has a prefix. It's third masculine singular because there is no suffix. So we have here a cal imperfect 3ms form of shafat. Shafat is he judged in the cal perfect 3ms, the lexical form he judged. But in this inflected form of cal imperfect 3ms, it becomes he will judge. Who will judge? Usually, especially with a third person verb, we expect to find our subject, our explicit subject, in the second position. And sure enough, we get Hanavi. The prophet will judge. The prophet will judge what? Et Ha'ir. The prophet will judge the city. Number 2, again, kind of expecting a verb. We ask how many letters is a Hebrew word supposed to have? 3. How many do I have? I have 5. So what are my prefixes? What are my suffixes? Shurik is an obvious suffix. Happens in a lot of different places. When shurik as a suffix is combined with yod as a prefix, we have a count imperfect 3MP. Alright, that means our root is shafat. Shafat in its lexical form, cal perfect 3ms, means he judged. We saw that above. Here we have a cal imperfect 3MP, so they will judge. Again, when we have a third person verb in the first position, we commonly have the explicit subject in the second position. They will judge. Who will judge? Ha-neva'im. The prophets will judge. The masculine plural subject matches the masculine plural verb. So we have a good subject-verb agreement here. The prophets will judge. The prophets will judge what? Et ha'arim. The prophets will judge the cities. All right, number 3. Again, thinking verb. How many letters am I supposed to have in a verbal root? 3. How many do I have? 4. What are my prefixes? What are my suffixes? Does shen ever function as a suffix? No. You never get shen as a suffix. But what about prefixes? Does aleph ever function as a prefix? Yes, in the cal imperfect 1cs, we get an aleph segel prefix. So we take off our prefix, we're left with our root, dalet, resh, shen, darash. Darash in its lexical form, cal perfect 3ns, means he sought or he inquired. So inflected or conjugated in the cal imperfect 1cs, it becomes I will see or I will inquire about. Okay? So in a first person verb, we often do not have an explicit subject because really the only possible explicit subject would be the pronoun I, which would be ani or anopi. So frequently first person verbs do not have an explicit subject. So if we pull out the subject, then the next thing we would expect is the object. I will seek what? Et ha-Elohim. I will seek God. All right, number 4, again, expecting a verb here. How many root letters is a verb supposed to have? 3. How many do I have? I have 4. What are my prefixes? What are my suffixes? Does ayin ever attach as a suffix? Never. We never add ayin as a suffix, so this must be part of the root. What about prefixes? Is tav ever used as a prefix? Yes, in the cal imperfect, the 3fs, the 2ms, and the 2fs all have, and we know it's singular because we don't have a suffix here, which means we also know it's not 2fs because that would have a here suffix. So the tav prefix with no suffix indicates a cal imperfect 3fs or 2ms. We need context to help us figure that out, so let's just leave it ambiguous at this point. This is either she will hear or you, masculine singular, will hear. Alright, if it's 3fs, we might have an explicit subject, devarim, but devarim can't be our subject because its number is plural and it's masculine. Here, if tishma is masculine, it has to be singular. Whether it's feminine or masculine, this is a singular form. So devarim cannot function as the subject. That means devarim is probably the object of this noun, and we do not have an object of this verb, and we do not have an explicit subject. So that means we're going to translate it either as she will hear words, not the words, we don't have a definite article here. She will hear words, or you, masculine singular, will hear words. Either one of those translations works. Context doesn't necessarily prefer 3FS over 2MS here, so we just translate both options. All right. Looking at number 5, again, expecting a verb, we can ask, how many letters is a verbal root supposed to have? 3. How many do I have? 4. What are my prefixes? What are my suffixes? Is ayin ever used as a suffix? Never. I'll just answer that up here. All right. Is noon ever used as a prefix? Yeah. In the Cal Imperfect 1CP, we get a noon here prefix. So we take that off, we get our root shema. Shema in its lexical form, Cal Perfect 3MS, means again, he heard or he listened to. Conjugated with the noon here prefix in the Cal Imperfect 1CP, this becomes we will hear or we will listen to. Since it's a first-person verb, it probably doesn't have an explicit subject. We can see that our next word has the et particle, which means this is marking a definite direct object. So we have no subject here. We will hear what or whom? We will hear et hazachenim. Et hazachenim is the elders. We will hear the elders, or we will listen to the elders. Number 6, Yishlach. And let me just go ahead and read this out. Yishlach ha'ish et hana'ar el ha'kohen. Yishlach, again, verb. How many letters do I expect a verbal root to have? 3. How many do I have here? I have 4. And my prefixes, what are my suffixes? Does het ever get used as a suffix on verb? No. Het must be part of the root. What about yod? Is yod ever used as a prefix? Yes, in the Cal Imperfect, yod gets used as a prefix in the third masculine singular and plural. Plural would have a shuric suffix here. So we know this is 3MS. Cal Imperfect 3MS form of shalach. Shalach in its lexical form, Cal Perfect 3MS, means he sent. So conjugated in the Cal Imperfect 3MS, it means he will send. Third person verb, so let's look for an explicit subject. Who will send? Ha'ish, the man. Ha'ish agrees with Yishlach. They are both masculine singular. So we probably have Ha'ish, we probably have the man will send. What will the man send? Et hana'ar. The man will send the boy or the servant. Where will the man send the boy or the servant? El ha-kohen, to the priest. The man will send the boy or the servant to the priest. Number 7. How many letters are we supposed to have? 3. How many do I have? 4. What are my prefixes? What are my suffixes? Does kaf ever get added to a verb as a suffix? Not as a conjugational suffix. We will see later on that you can add kaf to a verb or to a noun to indicate an object or a possessive suffix, but it doesn't indicate a conjugational suffix. And since we haven't learned about those yet, we don't need to worry about them. Kaf, not being part of a conjugational suffix, must be part of the root here. So what about tav? Is tav ever used as a prefix? Yes, the Cal Imperfect uses tav heric as a prefix. In the 3FS and the 2MS, and the 2fs if we have a heroic yod, which we don't, and in the 2mp if we have a shurik, which we don't, and in the 3fp if we have na, which we don't, and the 2fp, which we don't have with the na. So all that to say, Tog gets used a lot in the imperfect, but what we need to look at here is the Tog and the absence of a suffix. Tog without a suffix gets used in the Cal imperfect for the 3fs and the 2ms. So that's what we're looking at. All right, if it's 3fs, we might have an explicit subject, but we don't, because that would be the next word most likely, second position if we had an explicit subject, and we find al, a preposition. So an al is not going to connect with our subject. So we don't have an explicit subject here. So this is either she will reign, or you, masculine singular, will reign. She or you will reign where? Al ha malchut, over the kingdom. She will reign over the kingdom, or you will reign over the kingdom. How long? Le'olam. So either she will reign over the kingdom forever, or you, masculine singular, will reign over the kingdom forever. Number 8. Number 8, again, we start with our expectation of a verb. How many letters is the verbal root supposed to have? 3. How many do we have? We have 5. So what are our prefixes? What are our suffixes? Is shurik ever used as a suffix? Yes, commonly. We have a Cal Perfect 3CP uses shurik. In the imperfect, we have Cal Imperfect 3MP and Cal Imperfect 2MP. All of those use shurik. All right, so if shurik is our suffix, chet is probably part of the root, because chet is never involved in a conjugation of suffix. So what about our prefixes? Because if chet is part of the root, we've still got 4 letters. We've still got to get rid of something. Well, what about yod as a prefix? Do we ever see yod as a prefix? Yes, Cal Imperfect. In fact, yod prefix plus a shurik suffix is what we find in the 3MP conjugation of the Cal Imperfect. So we take those off, we get the tak as our root. The tak in its lexical form, Cal Perfect 3MS, means he trusted. In this inflected Cal Imperfect 3MP form, it means they, masculine plural, will trust. Third person verb, let's look for an explicit subject. We get ha-anashim next. If ha-anashim is the subject, it has to match yiv pahu in both gender and number. Ha-anashim is masculine plural. Yiv pahu is third person masculine plural, so they match. The men will trust. How will they trust? How do we modify this trust? Belohim. So Belohim is the bet preposition with Elohim. They will trust in God. For how long, or when will they trust in God? Le-olam. Le-olam. Lamed preposition with olam. Forever. The men will trust in God forever. All right. After C, we go to F. Skip over D and E. Look at F, and we'll just do the longest one here, since we've already done a lot of translations. Looks like that'll probably be. I'll go with number 2. Number 2 and number 5. Let's do both of them. Why not? All right. So, again, we'll do number 2 here. We're starting with the expectation of a verb. How many letters is verbal root supposed to have in Hebrew? 3. How many do I have? I have 4. So, what are my prefixes? What are my suffixes? Is tet ever used as a suffix? No. All right, what about my prefix? Is yod ever used as a prefix? Yes, yod-uric prefix occurs in the Cal Imperfect in the 3ms with no suffix, or it could also occur in the 3mp with the sheriff suffix. This one has no suffix, so this must be count imperfect 3ms. We take that off, we're left with the root shafat. Shafat in its lexical form, which is count perfect 3ms, means he judged. So in this conjugated count imperfect 3ms form, it means he will judge. Third person verb, let's look for a subject. Next we have ha Elohim. Ha Elohim could be the subject, but it has to match in gender and number. This one gets a little bit tricky because ha Elohim has a masculine plural form, and yishpot has a masculine singular form. But remember, ha Elohim, when it's used to refer to the God of Israel, often takes a singular, a masculine singular verb. You can see this in Genesis 1, and so God made man in his image, male and female, he created them. Those forms he created, he made, those use a third masculine singular verb. So this Elohim can be the subject here, even though there's a disagreement in number. Alright, so ha Elohim, God, will judge, and then we get ha Chaim, which is an adjective. So we have to figure out, what is ha Chaim modifying? What noun could it be modifying? We have a noun here, Elohim, and then we have a noun here, ha Amim. The problem is, with the article, the adjective usually is coming after the noun that it modifies, and I can't think of a time where you would have an adjective with the article modifying a definite direct object but coming before the definite direct object particle. So this particle really kind of divides the sentence here. So we can be pretty confident that ha Chaim modifies ha Elohim, especially when we see that they match in gender and number. Alright, so what sort of modification, what sort of function does this adjective have on ha Elohim? Ha Chaim means living, but is ha Chaim attributive? Is it predicative? Or is it substantival? We know it's not substantival because it seems to have a noun that it's modifying. And substantival only occurs when you've got an adjective and the noun that it's modifying, quote unquote, isn't present. Therefore, it's sort of standing in for the noun. And that would mean something like the living ones. But here, we have a noun that we think ha Chaim is modifying. That's ha Elohim. And so, is it predicative or is it attributive? Well, remember, attributive adjectives are going to match the definiteness of their noun. So here, ha Elohim is definite, and ha Chaim has the article, so it matches in definiteness. Furthermore, we've got the adjective coming after its noun, which usually indicates attributive. So we can be pretty sure this is an attributive relationship. How does an attributively functioning adjective get translated? Usually in English, we would translate it with the adjective before the noun. So here it would be living God. Could be the living gods, but it's almost certainly the living God because we've got this singular verb. So the living God. Not God is living. That would be predicative. But the living God. Okay, so our subject is actually this noun phrase. We've got the living God, not just God. The living God will judge. Whom or what will the living God judge? Et Hamim. So et Hamim is the people. But then we've got Ha Reshaim. Alright, well Ha Reshaim, if you take the Hey off, which is the definite article, remember this is a Hey Kametz, because Resh can't take the Dagesh of the definite article, so that Patak is going to lengthen to a Kametz. So Ha here is the definite article. We take that off, we get Reshaim. But we've also got a Hirik Yod Mem suffix. That's masculine plural. If we take that off, we're left with the root rasha. All right, rasha means guilty or wicked. Now, rasha as its lexical form is resh kametz, shin kametz, ayin. And actually, I think that this might actually be talking lexical form. The first kametz reduces to a shava to make room for the extra syllable which is added. This in suffix pulls the wind, let's say, of the vowels forward to the end, and so we have to reduce this vowel to make room for it. Hebrew also wants an open pre-tonic syllable, an open syllable that's immediately before the accented syllable. It wants that to be long, or as Futato calls it, medium. So that's why we get kametz, which is a medium or long vowel here. And so morphologically, that's what's going on. Syntactically, what's going on is we've got ha-risha'im modifying ha-amin. They both have the hierarchical mem suffix. They're both masculine plural. And so we have to figure out if this is attributive or predicative. An attributively functioning adjective is going to match the definiteness of its noun. Ha-amin is definite. Ha-risha'im has the article. That's a great clue that we've got an attributive function here. Further confirming that is the fact that the adjective comes after its noun, indicating an attributive function. All right, so how do we translate attributive adjectives into English? It's usually the adjective followed by the noun. So the wicked people. Not the people are wicked, that would be predicative. The wicked people. So going back through, the living, we've got he will judge. Who will judge? The living God. The living God will judge. What or whom will the living God judge? The wicked people. The living God will judge the wicked people. And Futato translates this as peoples because technically is the word for a people, like a people group. And so when you have amin, that would be peoples, many people groups. So he will judge the wicked people groups. All right, number 5 was the other one we're going to do. So here we've got ha-lahu. All right, we're anticipating a verb. How many letters is a verbal root supposed to have? 3. How many do I have? I have 4. So what are my prefixes? What are my suffixes? Is shirk ever used as a suffix? Yes. Cal perfect 3 CP and cal imperfect 3 MP and 2 MP all use the shirk suffix. The cal imperfect ones are going to have a prefix, either yod for the 3 MP or tav for the 2 MP. We don't have that, so the only option we're left with here is a cal perfect 3CP. If we take that off, we get halach. That is a verbal root that we recognize, halach. In its lexical form, cal perfect 3MS means he walked in this, or he went. In this conjugated form, halahu, cal perfect 3MP, that means they, masculine, walked or went. Third person verb, let's look for an explicit subject. We get ha-anashim. If ha-anashim is the subject of ha-lahu, then it has to match in number and in gender. Masculine plural verb, masculine plural subject. Excuse the fact that Logos has flipped off my hierarch here. This is a hierarch with no suffix. So we have a match. The men went. But we're not done yet. We've also got more. We've got the ha-na'arim. Ha-na'arim is definite article, na'ar, servant or boy, and then here yod mem. So the boys or the servants. So our subject isn't just the men went, but the men and the boys went. You might be saying, wait a minute, how do we know it's not the men went and the boys did something else? Well, in Hebrew, if you were going to have that structure, the vav would probably be attached to the verb that the boys did. and then you would have the boys as the subject. Since we have the vav attached to the boys, that tells me this is most likely a compound subject, going for ha lahu. So the men and the boys went. Where did they went? They went to ha milchama, to the battle, ha gedolah, the great one. All right, so here we have an adjective. Is the adjective modifying a noun? Well, we've got a feminine singular adjective, and we've got it following a feminine singular noun, milchama. So it's quite probable that this adjective is modifying ha milchama. They match in gender and number. How is this verb or this adjective functioning? Is it attributive or is it predicative? Well, it comes after its noun, and it matches its noun's definiteness. Hamilchama is definite. Gedolah has the article. This is almost certainly attributive. How do we translate an attributively functioning adjective into English? It's usually the adjective followed by the noun. So that would be the great battle. Not the battle is great, but the great battle. So the men and the boys or the servants went to the great battle. All right, we'll go ahead and wrap it up there. If you have any questions, send them to me, let me know. Hope you guys have a great weekend and look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks so much.